I would like then to call to order the second special meeting of the City of Bloomington Plan Commission to consider the draft Unified Development Ordinance. May we start with the roll call, please?
Here. Copper.
Here.
Whistler.
Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
All right. We have no minutes to be approved. Do we have any reports, resolutions, or communications other than the business of tonight's meeting?
Report tonight.
All right. Then I'm going to start by, as I did at our last meeting on Monday, I'm going to start by laying out the procedure that we're going to follow tonight and leading into subsequent meetings. On Monday, the Plan Commission requested the staff to draft two amendments. Requested the staff to draft, should I start over? All right. I'm going to start the meeting similarly to Monday night by laying out the procedure that we're going to follow tonight and leading into our subsequent meetings. On Monday, the Plan Commission requested two amendments to be drafted by our staff. And as I explained on Monday, this is the way that we are handling all amendments to this document, and that's because this is a legally binding ordinance. And so we are not in a position to draft these amendments ourselves or to take drafts from the public. We need to have them fully vetted by the legal staff as well as by the professionals in our planning office. So the way we outlined on Monday is that the Plan Commission basically will request the staff to draft amendments for our consideration on topics that we think are worthy of consideration. And on Monday, we did request two such amendments from the staff. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, I think only one of those is actually ready for prime time and adoption tonight. The two amendments that were requested by the Plan Commission on Monday, one was what I called an omnibus amendment, basically an amendment to fix a lot of typos, just wordsmith type of things in the document. And of course, any large ordinance is going to have those kinds of things, and it's better to fix them before you adopt the ordinance. The staff is still in the process of, they've only had basically 72 hours roughly not even to work on it since we authorized them to do so. So that amendment is not yet ready for prime time. They're well on the way. I think probably by tomorrow they'll have that amendment drafted, and we can pick it up and consider it at a subsequent meeting. The second amendment that was requested on Monday was to correct an erroneous impact when the staff changed the duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes in the R1, R2, and R3 zone from permitted use to conditional use. The way that was done inadvertently changed all duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes everywhere in the community, including, let's say, on large undeveloped tracts of land where an apartment complex might be proposed. It changed all of them to conditional uses, which was never the intent of what the staff did. The staff's intent was to change to conditional use only in the new situation of the corner lots in the R1, R2, and R3 zone. That amendment, as I understand it, is ready for prime time. Scott, I think you're going to do a brief report about that amendment before we take it up.
Yeah, I'll actually do a brief overview of the two amendments, even though the first one's not ready, just to give everyone an idea what the omnibus corrections is to the document. So again, I appreciate the guidance the Plan Commission gave us on Monday on staff requests on the two amendments. The first amendment is again looking at simple, what I call typos, things that we're looking at, some spelling errors, punctuation, the tense of words, if they're plural or non-plural, some cross-referencing in the document. There's sometimes it will reference another code, a section of a code, and it might be missing a 0 or a 1. Conjunctions, and sometimes there's some formatting style. If it's bold or italic, we want to make sure there's some consistency there, and some numbering and sequencing issues. I just have an example of here's 3 examples that we have found. I've handed to all plan commissioners a spreadsheet of a list that we're compiling. Our staff is still kind of going chapter by chapter to add those to the list. You can see there's, I think last count, there's about 100 of these, maybe a little bit more. For us to prepare kind of a detailed amendment that kind of says where we're changing that, we didn't have enough time to have that ready for you tonight. But these are examples of things that we're changing. So the first example is looking at, the sections when no on-site vehicle spaces are provided. The first sentence says where vehicle spaces are provided. Well, there's a conflict of what that section of code is, and we left out where no vehicle parking spaces are provided. Second example is in the sections of incentives and administration. We wanted to change the condition from and to or. So in this situation, the incentive is looking at when projects are when a project is being processed as a minor approval at staff level. Would only be in the situation if it's not adjacent to single-family residential neighborhoods, or when there's 50 or more dwelling units. So we didn't want both those conditions. So again, that's one thing that we're proposing there. And then another example of a tier 2 in this particular section, it was a copy of the prior section to that, where it's breaking out the differences between tier 1 and tier 2. If you actually read the 2 sections of tier 1 and tier 2, they say exactly the same thing. And all we are changing here is just changing to indicate for the tier 2 level of incentive, you need to be changing that to the different tier between the below 120 and below 80% AMI. So that's just some examples of some of the text amendments. We'll have a more detailed amendment to bring before you at a next or following hearing that we can kind of give you an overview of all those, and you can have those before you, but we just didn't have time to prepare all those this evening. Second resolution was going back to the issue of the unintended consequence of changing the duplex, triplex, and fourplex from permitted in the earlier drafts to conditional. Again, a lot of the feedback we heard was concerns from older neighborhoods in the built context. Really the larger issue is, staff feels like in new areas where there isn't development, it doesn't make much sense to have a conditional use if there's nothing there. So that's trying to rectify that. So here's the current language in the duplex section, and then beneath it's proposing. So beneath there you can see how the first section's dealing with on existing property that's currently zoned R1, R2, or R3, effective of the date of when this ordinance is passed. And then it talks about if it's been replatted or subdivided or consolidated to create additional areas, those will still have to go through a conditional use process. And the second part looks at new areas that are being rezoned to R1, R2, R3 after the date that were designated these things, then could go through, would not require the conditional use permit. And so that's part 1 of the second amendment, and then part 2 is similarly dealing with the triplex and fourplex issue, where again, here's the existing language that would cover, as drafted right now, it covers all conditions, and as proposed, it's breaking out the differences between those existing zoning districts and how they're zoned, and new areas, if they were rezoned to these, it would be permitted in those districts.
Okay. So once again, just to clarify, this amendment changes nothing with respect to areas that are currently zoned R1, R2, or R3. It changes nothing with respect to those zones, but it says that if we're talking about land that is not currently zoned R1, R2, R3, such as vacant land that will be rezoned for a large development, that they are handled differently from existing R1, R2, and R3 zones.
That's correct. And in the packet, there's, you have the exact examples in there and some notations on that. And that was the intent of, originally on some of the ideas of the feedback that we heard was, again, focusing on those existing areas and comments about it's fine for areas that haven't been developed and built out.
Okay, so are there any questions from any members of the Plan Commission about this amendment to fix that unintended glitch? Any questions? All right. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this amendment and only this amendment? Okay, seeing none, we are back to the commission, and we will need a motion with respect to this amendment. Scott, are we numbering these amendments? How?
Using the resolution number, so this would be, I guess, amendment number 2, and amendment number 1 would be the
Omnibus.
text,
Okay.
the omnibus one.
So we're deferring action on amendment 1. This is amendment 2, so I would need a motion.
Motion to adopt amendment 2 and 3, is that how we're calling these?
No, I think it's just
one
one
and 2?
amendment that has 2 parts.
Okay,
Right.
just 2 with 2 parts.
Okay, so we have, all right, we have a motion and we have a second. Any final discussion about Amendment 2? All right, let's have a roll call.
St. John? Yes. Hopper? Yes. Whistler? Yes. Burrell? Yes. Hoffman?
Yes.
Kate? Yes. Sandberg?
Yes.
Kappas? Yes. Kinsey?
Yes.
And Wright Randall?
All right, so that amendment is passed, is enacted. All right, so here's where we go next. Those were the only 2 amendments that were requested to be drafted by the staff at Monday night's meeting. We have no other amendments drafted and before us for consideration tonight. So there will be no actions taken tonight of any kind that will actually amend the document. We won't be able to do that until our next meeting, at which time hopefully we'll have plenty to talk about in the context of amendments. What we have to do tonight is to pick up where we left off on Monday night. On Monday night, because we've established what we thought would be a reasonable time limit for these meetings, we got through, I think, everyone who was here Monday and wanted to speak from the public, but we did not have time to come back to the Plan Commission and talk about and make resolutions, which is the way we're doing this, to ask the staff to draft additional amendments. We only had time on Monday to do the 2 amendments that I've previously discussed. So the next thing that has to happen is to return to the Plan Commission and have discussion and perhaps a series of resolutions to ask staff to draft some more amendments, which we will then be able to consider at subsequent meetings, not tonight. Again, there will be no amendments voted on tonight. Based on the conversations that took place on Monday, based on the public input, which we've now all had about 72 hours to try to digest, plus, of course, all of the written comments that we continue, well, many of them submitted electronically, but staff has printed them up for us. Based on those discussions, it seems pretty clear that there are 2 issues that kind of dominated the discussions on Monday. In fact, I think I'd say there's one issue that dominated the discussion on Monday, and then another one that was also in there. I'm therefore going to start this process of, it seems like we pretty clearly have to grapple with those issues, and by those issues, anyone who was here on Monday, it's not a secret that, vast majority of the discussion on Monday was about the way that the current draft of the UDO enables creation of duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes on certain lots in the R1 and R2 and R3 zones. We heard a tremendous amount of public input about that, a very large amount of it not happy about allowing those uses, and then also a substantial amount of comment the other direction, saying that we should expand the use of those types of housing. And clearly, we have to grapple with that. There's just no way to avoid that. So the second issue that was sort of a little bit in the shadow of the discussion of the plexes, as I'm going to call them, is the discussion of what to do about accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. And once again, although we didn't hear nearly as much public comment on Monday about that, we certainly heard some, and it was going in both directions. We heard some people say that we should be more restrictive of ADUs in the residential zones, perhaps returning them from permitted use to their previous status as a conditional use. And we also heard at least some comments saying we were being too restrictive about ADUs and should allow them to be a little bit bigger than the current draft allows. So, with the indulgence of my Plan Commission colleagues, since it's obvious that we're going to need to have amendments to consider on those issues, I'm just going to start this process by proposing a resolution to do exactly that. And actually, in my mind, it boils down to 5 separate amendments that I think the staff will need to draft for our consideration. First, if I gauged the sentiment on Monday correctly, I think everyone, no matter how they feel about the plexes, on the merits, I think everyone who spoke about the issue said they don't like to see plexes creating an incentive for teardowns, for tearing down existing housing stock and replacing that housing stock, some of which is some of our best affordable housing, with one of these new plexes. That seemed to be a kind of unanimous sentiment, whether they wanted the plexes to expand or be further restricted or cut off. Everyone agreed that there was a big risk of teardowns. The first resolution that I would like to propose is that the Plan Commission is resolved to ask the staff to draft an amendment to clarify and specify how precisely teardowns will be discouraged. The UDO says they'll be discouraged, but doesn't actually say how they would be discouraged or what we would do to discourage them. And I think we need to have something in front of us, no matter what we decide to do about the plexes. I think we need something that would discourage that kind of teardown. So that's the resolution, to request the staff to draft an amendment to specify and clarify how precisely teardowns to build new plexes will be accomplished. How will we discourage it?
Second.
All right. And again, we're not going to be talking about the merits of the amendments tonight. This is just to get them in front of the staff so they can come back to us with language that we can talk about. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion about this one as something we'd like the staff to draft for us?
Quick question on our almost etiquette and voting. It seems, you already clarified, in this vote, we're not speaking to the merits of it,
We
or
are
whether we
not.
would vote yes or no
We're
in the
not
future.
talking about whether a vote for the motion that I just made for the resolution is not a vote on the merits and does not in any way preclude you from voting the amendment down when it comes forward. It's simply that we cannot act without having actual amendment language, so we need to first, it's a kind of two-step process. We have to first ask the staff to draft an amendment on this subject. Then we can have a full discussion on the merits with public comment and the whole 9 yards.
So really, we're acknowledging that we should discuss this.
Correct.
We're
We're
not-
acknowledging
we're
that
not-
this is something worthy of our consideration.
I guess part of,
No, it's a resolution. I think we should follow that procedure. Take a second.
Maybe my question is, do you envision a scenario when a resolution would be raised and we wouldn't vote in support of it?
Well, if only one person thought it was something worth our time to even talk about, then it seems like a waste of the staff's time to spend an hour trying to draft an amendment on that subject. So that's the point of the resolution, is to say, is there enough interest up here that at least a majority of us would like to be able to have something that we can consider on this subject? That's really the only judgment that's being made tonight. Okay? Any other questions or comments about this one? All right, then let's go ahead and have a vote. Sorry? Sorry. The Plan Commission is hereby resolved that the staff should draft for our consideration an amendment to specify and clarify precisely how tear-downs to build plexes will be discouraged. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, let's go ahead and vote on this one.
Yes.
Kappas.
Yes.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Kate.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes.
Whistler.
Yes.
Copper.
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
All right, so that resolution is passed, which means that the staff will bring us an amendment to address that issue. That's one. The next two are a paired set of amendments, and so will the next two after that. As I said, on Monday, we heard a lot of sentiment that these plexes should be prohibited. They're currently, in the current draft, conditional uses in the R1, R2, and R3 zones. Many people told us on Monday that they would like to see us eliminate these uses even as conditional uses. And then many other people said we should return them to the status of permitted uses, which was what they were in the first earlier draft of the UDO. The staff later changed them from permitted to conditional in R1, R2, and R3. So in order to have a full discussion of that issue and be able to act on it as an amendment, this resolution asks the staff to draft two parallel amendments. One that would eliminate the plexes as a conditional use entirely in the R1, R2, and R3 zones. The other parallel amendment would return the plexes from conditional use to permitted use as they were in an earlier draft of the UDO. So these are competing amendments. Obviously, we would not enact both of them. We might enact neither of them and leave things right where they are, but we certainly would not be enacting both of these. But for us to be able to have a meaningful discussion, we need to have the staff again do its work and bring us a legally drafted version of an amendment that would do each of those things. So this is one resolution to request two amendments from the staff, one going in each direction.
Second.
Okay. Once again, it's pretty obvious in this case that voting for this resolution does not make any comment on the merits because they go in opposite directions. But are there any other questions about this one? Go ahead. Yes.
Joe, how do you anticipate that we'll consider these? I've been in meetings in the past where we have these sorts of competing amendments, and the order in which they're discussed has a meaningful impact on the outcome.
That's a fair question. So let me say what I think is going to happen at our next meeting. At our next meeting, when it comes to these paired amendments, so with any amendment that stands on its own, like the one we just requested, someone will move it, we'll have public comment, and we'll vote. Okay? Those go pretty much routinely. With respect to the paired amendments, it seems to me that the logic of how to address those is that we should let the public speak first and tell us what they want us to do with those. We could make one motion and then make another motion, but basically it means everybody's going to have to stick around and say the same thing twice, or maybe even 3 times. But yes, in any case, every one of these amendments has to be moved at some point, and there has to be full public comment, and then Plan Commission discussion and vote.
We have to vote on one of them before the other.
Yes, of course. I'm just saying, I think what makes the most sense would be to have the public speak fully on the issue.
Agreed.
Of the plexes and
Yeah.
tell us which amendment they prefer.
Right, because
and
if we propose Amendment A and then that gets shot down, and then we propose Amendment B and we go back through
We're
the whole
repeating
cycle
the same
again, we're going to be
discussion.
here forever.
Exactly.
I
And that's
guess-
going to be true with the last
So I guess
two
the
as
next
well.
question would be then, is it a foregone conclusion that if A passes, we don't consider B?
Someone could move B. It would be kind of illogical for a majority of the Plan Commission to first vote for A and then, 10 minutes later, vote for B. But if the
Well-
commission changes its mind in those 10 minutes,
Depending on the way it's drafted,
Yeah.
there could be a scenario where either A or B are preferable to the current language.
oh, yeah, no, certainly A could be voted down and then B could be enacted. I thought you were talking about A being approved and then B being approved.
It's conceivable, I suppose.
It's conceivable. It's conceivable. I
Okay.
hope it doesn't happen, but it's
I hope.
conceivable.
All right, thank you.
But yes, so that's, again, I just want to stress, none of what's happening tonight involves even prejudging or signaling about the merits of these amendments. We just need to have somebody draft them. It's the kind of thing City Council would do by going to their attorney and saying, please draft us, an ordinance about this. We're doing it in public, but otherwise that's all it means. All of the merits talk will happen at the next meeting. Anybody else who has any question or comment about this? Go ahead.
So this would be my first time going through something like this. And so I'm just a little apprehensive about having parallel thoughts here, kind of along the lines of what's going on. It's like, it seems to me, while one can be enacted, which would eliminate, right, but then the other one could just either make it permitted or it just could stay the same, like conditional use. I understand that. But I feel like you will have the same exact conversation for both of them, and depending on how the makeup of this commission is, it'll just be one or the other. So,
Yeah, I agree that it's going to be the same discussion. All the points that are made for one amendment are basically points against the other one.
yeah.
That's
So-
why.
so you're
That's why the
essentially just
logic is
combining
we
it.
start with the public comment period, hear everybody's opinion. So that's actually, it's more like what we do with our regular cases. We actually hear public comment first, and
Yeah.
then a motion gets made.
Okay.
And that's how this would work too. Everyone will tell us exactly what they think. I'm sure we're going to hear
Oh, yeah.
an earful about this.
Absolutely.
At our next meeting.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
by the way, I should also say, I didn't say it, Brent, my sense is we have to be prepared when this comes forward at our next meeting, and I'm hoping the staff will be able to get us these amendments for the next meeting. I think that's pretty easy to do, probably. We have to be prepared to potentially waive our 9:30 rule. I mean, we're going to have to hash this out as long as it takes to get to closure on this. Closure in the sense of our advice to the city council, because whatever we do, again, is only advisory to the city council. They can always have another crack at it and reverse anything we do. Yeah?
I would also like to advise that it's not just the sheer numbers of people who show up next Thursday, but all this. I mean, we have gotten a ton of community response that also I think we'll all be factoring into as we weigh.
Well, I will say, since you mentioned that we're not elected officials except for you. And our job is to basically think about the merits of these issues. We certainly want to hear everybody's opinion. I learned a lot from what happened on Monday. But it's not a vote of the public. It's, whose arguments are the better arguments. Now, I can't speak for the council, but from the Plan Commission's point of view, I think that's kind of what our role is.
That's kind of what I mean, because again, even as I was listening Monday night, some arguments resonated, others did not, and that's a subjective call up here.
Yep.
so.
Questions, comments over here?
With respect to the motion or the resolution about going back to permitted, we've already received a number of comments, and we heard some commentary on Monday about trying to strike a balance or making some changes that would allow by right duplexes and triplexes, but with different parameters than are currently reflected in here. There were some height
That would
comments.
have to be a
Is that-
subsequent amendment. I
Okay,
think.
that was my question.
So
is,
this
are you-
process can go on as long as the Plan Commission wants it to go on.
Well, is there any benefit, though, in asking for the resolution that you're making now to ask the staff to look not only at an amendment that would return it to by right, but by right with different parameters? Not
Unless we
prejudging
have
anything
some-
here, I'm just,
Unless we, at this point, I'm not sure whether that's, it may be premature to talk about those kinds of parameters or limitations, because unless we can give the staff some kind of sense of what that would be and what it would look like, what would be the limits we would want to see in an amendment, we're kind of leaving them like, I'm not sure that's enough guidance. I was going to say this when we got past these first five, but with whatever resolutions we put on the floor tonight to ask the staff to draft amendments, we're not the ones drafting. I'm
Right.
not asking anybody to do that from the floor, but we have to give the staff enough of a sense of what it is we want them to draft that they know what to do. To just say we want some limits.
yeah.
The reason the first one was phrased the way it was about the tear downs is because I know from my discussions with the
Right.
staff that they already have ideas that they're perfectly prepared to implement that they can draft in an amendment to strongly discourage tear downs. So I feel like they already know what they're doing on that one. On this one, I feel like we'd have to tell them more than what you just said in order for them to know where to go with that and what to draft.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Now, if we can get to
And
that
it's-
point tonight, so be it. If not, it can be a follow-on
Yeah.
amendment to whatever we do at our next meeting.
Okay. It may have to be that, because we've even gotten some late-breaking
Right.
comments that's
Right.
impossible
This
to
may
digest
very
right
well
now
turn out to
do
be an
that,
iterative
so-
process in which we take a step, we kind of decide the big issue, and then we move on and try to refine it and make it better. That's a very plausible scenario.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one more clarification. I agree, it's good to have first and then do that. After we make our motion, though, do we not have to allow public comment again? Okay.
We have to have public comment on the merits of what we're considering, but the order in which it's done, that's the order we do all of our business. We hear from the public, and then we make a motion, and it doesn't go back to the public at that point.
Thanks.
I mean, staff or legal can tell me I'm wrong about that, but that's routine for our business to proceed in that manner, to hear the public first and then make a motion. Scott, you're looking at me?
With our legal staff otherwise, but
That's
I
fine.
think especially the way this resolution's being drafted, it'd be kind of hard to put one up and then go through that process and then another one and just
Right.
be replaying the same thing that just happened.
Yeah, they're mirror images of each other, so we're just asking people, come up and tell us which one you like. Other questions?
I just want to acknowledge kind of what Beth was just suggesting as well. I think there will be other issues that we'll have to address with this very same one. I think we had enough comments about limiting massing in the plexes, owner occupation kind of comments that we're going to have some more refinements to this. So I just want to acknowledge that that's something that we're hearing, and I think we're still processing all that. So I suspect this is not the end, even in two drafted amendments, that this would be the end.
Yep. Yep, that can go on as long as we want it to. Okay?
Okay.
Anything else before we vote to authorize staff to draft these two amendments? All right, then the resolution is to request these two competing parallel amendments. May we have a roll call, please?
St. John,
Yes.
Copper,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Kappas,
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
All right, so that resolution passes, and those two amendments, that set of amendments, will be drafted by the staff and brought back to us at our next meeting. One more pair, and it has to do with the accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Again, we didn't hear nearly as much talk about that on Monday, but we certainly heard some, and it was persuasive in two different directions. We heard some members of the public say that we should make the ADUs conditional uses like they once were. The current draft makes them permitted uses. So we were requested by some to return that ADU to the status of a conditional use. Others said that we were being too restrictive on the ADUs by limiting them to 1 bedroom and 440 square feet, that was simply not large enough for some uses that we would want to put in those ADUs. So this resolution is to request the staff to draft two amendments, one of which would make the ADUs conditional instead of permitted. The other would leave them as permitted uses and allow them to have 2 bedrooms, and I believe the proposal that was made was to have the size be limited by the size of accessory units generally in the relevant zoning district. So if a garage could be a certain size, the ADU could be that same size as the garage. So that's the pair.
Second.
Once again, I think before I'll preempt, once again, this could turn out to be an iterative process. It's certainly possible that that we would tweak these. It's also possible for this pair, since they're not strictly speaking mirror images, it's possible that both of these could be enacted. In other words, that we could make them conditional rather than permitted, but expand the size that they could be as conditional uses. So it is at least possible that both could be passed in a logical manner. Questions to my right?
Good.
Yeah, I was going to raise the point that I don't think these are mirror images, and I
They're
think
not.
there's, I'm concerned about this one a little bit more than the other, because I can see the scenario where one of them is adopted, saying allowing larger uses or larger structures, and then a commissioner says, oh, well, I don't want that, so we better make it just a conditional use, when in reality, there may be a majority that just favors the status quo. And if we consider both of them, we may be forcing an amendment when the majority prefers no amendment at all.
So one way to address that might be to simply encourage the Plan Commission members to discuss this before anybody puts that motion on the table. That would certainly be one way to kind of get to that point.
Yes.
Right?
I would encourage that, yeah.
Yeah? That sounds fine to me.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments from my right? How about on the left? No? Yeah, go ahead.
So the other sentiment we heard in association with this was the creation of more than one bedroom as an option in
Yes,
an
I put-
ADU? So
I include
is that,
that.
you include
Yeah,
that?
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
Great, good. I didn't know if
it-
that was completely in the context of larger or, okay.
No, it was.
Great.
The amendment going in one direction is to make them conditional again rather than permitted. The amendment going the other direction is to keep them as permitted and allow them to be two-bedroom.
Okay, two bedrooms.
And
Okay.
whatever size square footage is the underlying zone allows for accessory,
Okay,
for accessory uses.
okay. Thank you.
Okay? All right, if there are no more questions about that one, then, again, a vote is simply a vote to ask the staff to draft us language on this one, on this pair.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Kappas,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Whistler. Yes. Copper,
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
All right, so we've now asked the staff to draft 5 amendments in language that we can consider at our next meeting. We're going to continue this process now. I'm going to just open it up to the rest of my fellow commissioners to make any other resolutions they would like to make, to ask the staff to draft any other additional amendments. I would like to say before we get into that, though, now that we've done these first ones that were the subject of so much discussion on Monday, again, we won't be hearing any more talk about those subjects until we get those amendments back. So if the only thing you're here for tonight is because you care about ADUs and/or plexes, know that there's not going to be any more discussion of those topics tonight. That will happen when we have amendment language to talk about, that we will talk about at our next meeting. I personally would predict pretty strongly that that those are the only subjects we will have enough time to talk about at our next meeting. I think it will take the entirety of the time that we have on, it's 1 week from today, right? 1 week from today, September 5th at 5:30. It's in this room again? Okay. What? Is it, sorry, did I get the date wrong? Oh, it said 6 p.m.?
There was a typo on Monday's packet, it says 6 p.m., but it's 5:30.
Okay, so on Thursday, September 5th at 5:30 p.m., right here in council chambers, we're going to take up the subjects of the amendments that we just asked the staff to draft. That will be the topic of the day for September 5th. We may not get any further than deciding what to do with the plexes. We may not get to the ADUs. If we have enough time, we'll get to the ADUs as well. But know that that's probably all we could even remotely hope to do on that night, which means we're going to need more meetings. Whatever else we ask the staff to draft tonight will probably go to a subsequent meeting. Scott, you said we probably have a day blocked already for that based on earlier information.
September 10th, I believe, is the night after your Monday regular session. I believe we have council chambers reserved for then. And then after that, the availability of rooms is challenging. So I
Right.
do have some options that we can look at.
All right, so most likely, anything else we ask the staff to draft for us will not be considered until September 10th, because September 5th is going to be devoted to the subjects that we've just talked about. All right, so it's back to the commission for any other motions, resolutions that anyone would like to request staff to draft for us.
Comment. I'll be attending the Indiana Association of Floodplain and Stormwater Management on September 5th and won't be here, but I'll be at every meeting that I can make it, just to give you a heads up.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your being here. All right. The floor is open. Discussion or motions?
Request staff to draft an amendment that would change the limits on livestock in urban agriculture to categorize them by size and weight rather than by a list of specific species.
Okay, so this is a resolution to ask the staff to draft an amendment to the draft UDO that would change the way that urban livestock are treated from species, which is the way it's currently done in the current draft, to size. Size and weight, sorry. Size and weight. All right, we have a motion and a second. Again, we're not debating the merits, but would anybody like to? Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
I just could have a point of clarification. I think, would you not want any species included in there, or would you want size and weight to be included as part of those species? I do believe the one comment we had was regarding goats, because there's a wide range of size and weights. I guess I'm imagining if we got rid of species, there might be some animals that we haven't thought of that might be.
I think it would be okay to have a list of prohibited species, if there were certain that we were wanted to be sure that weren't allowed, that were dangerous. But I don't think it's realistic for us to have a comprehensive list of every species that we want to allow. So I would prefer to see size and weight categorized, and then a list of prohibited species, if that were appropriate.
So essentially to add height and weight into that part of the ordinance that addresses urban livestock, so that it's not solely based on species, but also based on size and weight. That's how I'm hearing this.
Yes.
Okay, does that help? Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second to ask the staff to draft us an amendment to do that. Is there any discussion or questions or discussion? All right. If not, then we can go to another roll call.
St. John? Yes. Copper?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Hoffman?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Kappas?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
All right, so that is another request for staff to bring us an amendment on that subject. Again, I'll reiterate, there's no way we're going to get to that one on September 5th, so the staff has a little more time to draft it for us. We'll likely get to that on September 10th. Who's next?
I would like to request a resolution from the Plan Commission, Planning Department, in regards to payment in lieu for incentives. And that's Chapter 20.04. And I would like clarification about the payment in lieu procedures and process, and that the council must approve the process, and the process should be consistent and maybe standardized for everyone. Does that make sense?
Okay. I believe this is tracking some comments that we heard on Monday.
Correct.
Okay. Scott, does that give you enough to know what's being requested here in terms of that amendment?
Yeah, I think just basically changing it from the city to clarify that the city council would be approving the calculations and rates for the payment in lieu.
And that there will be established procedures
Yeah.
that
That would be part of that.
before
yes.
it could be
Yeah.
implemented. Okay.
So it's clear on how this is done and not left to be a subjective situation.
Okay. All right, so we have that motion in the form of a resolution to ask the staff to draft us an amendment to do that. We have a second. Any further questions, comments, discussion?
Chamber was talking about, but part of that also was clarification on what the funds can be spent on. So that
I'm sorry, I
that the
couldn't hear
council
that.
would the council would also address as part of this, like what happens with the funds, and that would also be part of what they address. At least that's my understanding of part of what the.
Okay, is that part of the motion too, to deal with the disposition of the funds?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, discussion, comments? Seeing none, we can have a roll call.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Kappas,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Copper,
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
All right, that's another request for an amendment from the staff. Again, that will come to us after our next meeting. Anyone else?
I have another consideration. Request, given the comments we heard about the Environmental Commission's concern and the fact that the person who spoke indicated that there were 100 and some amendments suggested on behalf of the Environmental Commission, I would like to at least have the staff address some specific considerations around impervious surface changes. And some have to do with the greater allowances, higher percentages that are afforded in this document, and at least have some consideration of what the Environmental Commission has put forward as some decreases to those numbers. And perhaps I thought they raised a number of other good suggestions about allowances with parking structures and what might be reducing impervious surface if the parking is interior to the building. So I thought there were some really creative ideas in some of that, and I would like those elements that were raised in the written feedback to be considered. I think they're worthy of consideration, and there were a bunch of them in there. So I don't know if I need to enumerate them, Scott, or if they're pretty obvious.
I think in this case, since this is a list of specific suggestions that have already been made by another body, another institution, I think it'll be sufficient if you simply reference, Scott, to the parts of the Environmental Commission recommendations that you'd like drafted. Does that work for you, Scott? Since this is referring to a specific.
I think I got an idea of portions of that. I mean, there were comments that were questions, and there were some other suggestions that, are clarifications that, in our opinion, don't necessarily belong in the UDO. An example that comes to the top of my head is the Sustainability Action Plan is part of the comprehensive plan is not. It's a matter of fact. So that those type of things, that's why we didn't include in there. So the other ones, I think we can kind of pair out and look at those.
Yeah, I would agree that they're the ones that are specific about percentages and things that are specific to the legal aspects of this UDO are worthy of our consideration, and I'd like to get at least the staff to resolve or to at least consider those and bring forward an amendment if it's appropriate.
All right, we have a motion. Did we have a second on this one? All right, we have a motion and a second to ask the staff to draft an amendment that would pick up some of the specific recommendations made by the Environmental Commission with respect to impervious surfaces. Were there any other top? And
increasing some trade-off options in there. There were some suggestions where it's appropriate to put in a legal document like this. I think there were several worth considering.
all right. So we have a motion and a second. Any questions, any comments, any discussion on my right? Any on my left? Yes.
One of those that I noted that was brought up was the invasive species list that the Environmental Commission didn't think that it was long enough. I'm not suggesting that that's increased, but I do think, along with Commissioner Kinsey's suggestion, that should be one of those items that is reviewed.
So basically what I'm hearing is a request for the staff to go back to the Environmental Commission's list in these areas and to take a harder look to see whether a few more of those recommendations could be added to the document. That's what I'm hearing, Scott. Okay? And again, because this is a specific list that's already in existence, I think we can work with that. Any further comments about this one? All right, let's have a vote.
St. John,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Kappas,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
All right, so that resolution is approved, and the staff will draft some amendments or an amendment that will address those issues. Please.
Yes, I'd like to make a resolution that has to do with something demolition delay for partial development, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't have the complete number. It's 2006 something 2A3. The header is exemption to posted notice, and there's an A, and then there's a 1, and then there's a 2, and then there's a 3 that reads, staff's decision shall be based on the same criteria used by the Historic Preservation Commission when it renders a determination about whether, and I'd like to strike what's written and add whether the partial demolition could result in the historic structure's loss of its contributing designation status. Is that clear? And again, I wish I could pinpoint exactly where this is. I just copied the single page here. But it just wants to make clear that any partial demolition would not in any way alter contributing designation status in the shard.
All right. Do we have a second? Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. Scott, is that sufficiently clear what's being requested?
I can hand you the page if that helps.
Staff's decision shall be based on the same criteria used by Historic Preservation Commission when it renders a determination about whether or not a property should be recommended for local historic designation. That one? Yeah. And then what was your addition?
The addition for that last line there would be, the partial demolition could, about whether the partial demolition could result in the historic structure's loss of its contributing designation status.
Okay, thank you.
And again, I can give this to you if you want.
Partial as opposed to...
Partial, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Anything on my left about this? Okay, anything on my right? Okay. All right, roll call, please.
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Copper,
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
That motion passes. Staff will draft an amendment to address that aspect of the historic preservation, of demolition delay. So, anyone else? Yes. Sorry, I saw him first.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Weeds a bit about financial surety requirements for subdivision plats.
Okay.
Be it resolved that the Plan Commission requests the planning staff to draft for consideration a possible amendment to clarify the surety requirements for secondary plats. Basically, there's some numbers in there that seem like they're either contradictory or confusion. I just want them to take a look and clean it up if necessary.
All right, we have motion. Do we have a second? Second. Okay, Scott? I'm going to just keep coming back to you on each of these and see if you need a little more clarity or not.
It works right down the hall for me.
Okay, you can work it out. All right, sounds good. Any comments, any questions? All right, go ahead.
Whistler,
Yes.
Copper,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Kappas.
Yes.
All right, that resolution is adopted. Now,
I'd like to put forward a resolution to amend, for staff to create an amendment on 20.02.50, which is the Planned Unit Development District. Under B, which is qualifying standards, 6, there it says the proposed PUD zoning district embraces several highly valued design features as determined by the Planning and Transportation Director, including but not limited to, and it lists a bunch. I would be it resolved that the city staff create an amendment to move 6G, which is protection of specific natural, environmental, and scenic resources or green space. And then H, retaining natural landforms throughout the development as their own criteria outside of 6. So create a new 6 and a 7 and move 6 to 8. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Can you describe a little bit more what you're hoping to achieve or what you think that responds to?
The way that I've read 6 is that is, those are highly valued design features that aren't necessarily criteria, but rather they're nice to haves. And I view G and H as, if this is a PUD coming forward, that G and H are highly valued qualifying standards for a PUD in terms of negotiation and us trying to move forward in a more environmentally focused manner as a city.
You have a page for that?
Yeah, it's page 51. 69 overall of the 421.
Did you say as their own 7 and 8?
As, sure.
Standalone.
Yes, they're standalone. Thank you.
All right. Did we get a second on this one?
Second.
All right, we have a second. Questions, discussion? I'll start on my left this time. Go ahead.
But I really kind of missed a lot of what you were saying, so I think we're unclear down here on what's, it was a little hard to hear, so.
Okay. So, my explanation or what I want to do? Great.
Yeah.
I'll go slower, sorry. So, under section UDO 20.02.50, Planned Unit Development District, under subpart B, qualifying standards, section 6 talks about highly valued design features. The subpart G and subpart H of 6, I would like to move out of 6 and create as their own standalone criteria as part of a PUD qualifying standard. And then the reason why is because I believe we need to move forward in a more environmentally focused manner, and I think the way that 6 is written, it's a nice to have and a very optional.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions from down on my left? Any on my right? Scott, you're clear what this one's requesting? Sure. Okay. All right, then let's vote.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Kappas,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Whistler, Copper,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
All right, another request for staff to bring us an amendment on that issue. Next.
Would it be possible to have the UDO on the screens for specific things like that? Is that, just might help out us and the public for if it's a real specific item.
So while Scott's doing that, I'll go ahead and, were you going to go directly to a motion? I don't want to preempt you. Okay. Since we're in 20.02, I will make a motion to ask the staff to draft an amendment to 20.02.30A. So at present, that provision says, this is in the section dealing with the mixed-use student housing zone, one of only two brand-new zones that this UDO creates. All the others are translations of existing. Jackie, you're shaking your head. Is it more than two? Okay. Well, in any event, it's one of the new ones. Okay, 4. It's one of the new ones that this UDO creates. And what that, but we're not yet at the stage of map amendments, of map changes. That'll come later. Nevertheless, I would like the staff to draft an amendment that would provide greater specificity and clarity about where the new mixed-use student housing zone will be located. This is even in advance of the map changes that will come later. So I'm not looking for a map, but I'm looking for specific information based on proximity to campus and based on the characteristics of the areas where this zone will be located. So proximity and characteristics.
Second.
Any discussion on my left? Questions? How about on my right? Any questions? Okay. If not, then we're ready for a vote on this one.
Kate? Yes. Sandberg?
Yes.
Kappas?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Copper?
Yes.
Whistler? Yes. Hoffman?
Yes. All right. Anyone else? Yep.
So I would like to make a resolution, or be it resolved that the staff make an amendment for section, this is on page 19 of 421 in your packet, everyone. 20.02.10, which is zoning districts established under C, planned unit development districts. C1 states planned unit development districts are separate base zoning districts negotiated with the city and approved by city council. I'd like staff to propose an amendment that considers adding and negotiated via the city's planning department, reviewed by the plan commission and approved by city council, et cetera. So removing with the city and adding in city's planning department and reviewed by the plan commission.
All right, so if I understand, this is to be more specific,
More specific.
about the process
Yes,
of the
please.
PUD. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Do we have a second? All right. Any discussion? Questions, discussion? Okay, if not, we can go to the roll call.
St. John? Yes. Whistler?
Yes.
Copper?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Hoffman?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Kappas?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
All right, that motion passes, and the staff will draft an amendment to that effect. Did you have something? Go ahead.
I have a nitpicky one that came as part of the feedback we received related to language about alley access. And if you're bringing anything up on the screen, this one might be a good one to show, if you can. It's on page...
We're getting no signal at the moment.
Yeah,
but-
okay, then...
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. This, I would like to propose that staff consider some clarifying language, perhaps changing syntax or references in the language associated with alley access in individual single-family access. That's on page 226. It's 7A2.
226.
No, 7A1, sorry, 7A1 on page 226. And the language is just really difficult to access, I think, and if there's a way to clarify and simplify the language, individual, single-family, attached and detached duplex, triplex, or 4+ residential lots may be used directly front arterial level streets. I mean, it's just really, there's some really dense description in here, and I just wonder if there might be some ways. I hope I have the right one. I'm trying to respond to a request that came in for clarification from one of our write-in folks. This may not be the right one, actually. It's about setbacks.
That's one that the staff also, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
like part
good.
of two
That just
sentences
all right.
that we had identified as
Okay.
well. So I think we
Great.
are
may
offering,
actually-
you'll see in the
Does that make it on
omnibus
the-
a quick change.
That'll be in the
Okay,
omnibus.
great.
Okay, so we don't need to.
That's wonderful. Okay,
do that
good.
one
I just
separately.
didn't want to. Terrific. Thank you.
All right? Yes, please.
Yes, I'd like to recommend, this goes back to the table of allowed uses, page 63, that we look at the RM zoning to keep it at its current density, which of course would then put dwelling fourplex at conditional, dwelling multifamily at conditional in this particular area. It's the table of uses. It would put residential multifamily at conditional for those things, because that's kind of on the border. Page 63, the table of allowed uses, just puts RM zoning back to its current density.
It's page 81 out of 421. It says 63 on the UDO,
Oh, I
but
see.
overall it's 81 out of 421.
200320, the table of allowed uses.
The changes you want to make?
It proposes changing the RM zoning back to its current density.
Is that in the table? I don't think
It's
it's in
not?
the table itself.
Okay.
I think that's where the confusion is.
Oh, okay.
I think it would appear in the, yeah.
Okay.
Is it clear, Scott, what's being requested? Not in the table, but in the section of the code dealing with the RM zone?
Yeah, the section at least, section 2, I'll try to pull it up. Oh, 16. I know.
It's not clear to me what we're trying to resolve here. Is it?
Is that what? The rationale is that there are some, single-family homes there, and so the greater density might be more encouraged in the residential high-density areas. And of course, without mapping, this is all a little bit concerning as to what happens here.
Okay, so the amendment would be to basically reduce density permitted in the RM zone. Reduce it back to its,
Where it was
in
currently.
the past, in the previous
Yeah,
code.
not in the current draft.
Okay, all right.
The problem is we're not doing density in this code at all. So it would be the only zone with any density regulation. So maybe the reference, the table reference was, do you want to, for like a particular proposed use like quads or something to not be allowed there?
Yeah, it's basically dealing with quads and multifamily in this particular.
Because I know people have been saying back to the old density, but we're not doing densities at all. We didn't recommend a new density. So I just want to make sure we get what it is that you're wanting for next time. So looking to see that things that wouldn't be allowed now would not be allowed in the future.
But as conditional, not that they're
As
not
conditional.
allowed, but
Okay.
they would be more site-specific as opposed to just a blanket,
Okay.
it's permitted.
Great.
Does that
Yeah, that
help?
makes sense.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
And so, right.
So it would be useful.
Okay.
Yeah, so changing some of those from currently permitted to conditional.
Got it. To try to better approximate what happens under the current code, even though it's done differently.
Right.
Okay? All right, so, this resolution is to ask the staff to draft an amendment to the RM permitted uses, changing some of them to conditional uses so as to better approximate the kinds of density that exist in the current code. All right, do we have a second for that? To ask the staff to draft.
Second.
Any discussion?
Trouble following here. So the proposal is to change the plexes that are currently proposed to be permitted use in RM to change that to be conditional? Is that correct?
Not all the plexes, just the fourplex and the multifamily is what I understand is in the current, yes?
So the current draft has all plexes as permitted uses.
Yeah.
Some
I
with-
may need to go back to the drawing board if this is not clear, because what I have in front of me is not clear either, so.
I think there'll be time to do that if you'd rather pull this one
Wait,
back.
yeah,
for
let's
now.
pull it back.
All right.
I need to ask more questions.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not entirely sure that this wouldn't be handled by one of the First Amendment that we
Yeah, the
asked.
First Amendment's specifically about R1, R2,
R1,
and
R2, R3, this is in the
She's
higher
trying to address
densities.
the same kind of issue,
But in RM, okay.
And there are still some single-family homes that could be impacted here, which is why this zone needs to be,
I
I
got
think,
you.
a little more carefully looked at when we go to mapping and maybe put some of the higher density things in the RH where that belongs. But again,
Got it.
that's the intent of what this is trying to do.
Okay. Again, I think given what we're going to be doing at our next meeting, there's plenty of time to get
Okay.
this resolved and bring it back to staff. Anyone else have anything for tonight that they would like to ask the staff to draft for our consideration, probably on September 10th? Yeah, I'm sorry, Brett.
I've got one more issue. I'm not sure that it's ready for action. I'm not exactly sure.
We're not taking any action tonight.
I'm not sure that I'm ready to ask for an amendment because I don't know exactly
Well, this is
what I
also
want.
discussion time, so
But,
you can
yeah,
raise anything you
so,
want.
yeah, if it's okay, I'd like to just kind of raise a point of discussion and maybe start a conversation around it. One of the concerns in the current UDO that I have with the current UDO is, as it relates to impervious surface, is that, we have permeable pavers are in many cases treated as impervious surface. And yet, a deck, for example, that may allow much more water through than pavers would are treated differently. So I want to make sure that we're addressing the definition of impervious surface a little bit more granularly. And in addition to that, I don't believe there's any mention of geogrids or things that would just, keep soil compact without any real hardened masonry paver. And I think that is far preferable to any sort of masonry in terms of what it does with runoff and absorption. So I'd like to see that addressed a little bit more specifically. The only reference that I can find in the current draft sort of just mentions alternative paving systems that alternative approved paving systems. And I feel like that we probably should get a little more specific with that because I just don't believe they should all be treated equally. Right? There's quite a bit of difference in the types of paving systems that are out there in terms of affect runoff. So maybe some discussion about that, but I think I'd like to see an amendment at some point that brings more clarity to that definition.
Scott, is that something that is clear enough at this point? Is it ready for prime time in terms of drafting an amendment to that effect?
I think it'd be kind of hard to get specificity because there have things that have been tried and don't work here, and they work in other places. And then, as you know, I think as far as allowing a flexibility to allow some of the newer things that come in line, I think that's the intent of the current language. So I think it might be helpful to have a little bit more direction on what type of specificity you're looking at.
Okay. So Brad, you know what your mission is for next time then?
Yeah, we can have a discussion about this offline. I don't think we need to try to give too much direction tonight. Well, I think we've got time to get to it, but I just wanted to start the conversation.
So are you looking for flexibility, or are you looking for?
Well, I'm looking for flexibility, but I'm also looking to make sure that, it's not, I think in the current code, they're sort of all treated equally, like there's just pavers, right? We don't have any specificity. I just want to make sure that we're not, I want to make sure that we're encouraging things that truly are pervious and not creating runoff, as opposed to just, any old pavers will do, no matter how far they're spaced or what's between them or what's underneath them and so forth, so.
I think some of the challenges with that is time. A lot of these are installed and they're pervious today, and you already mentioned the compaction issue, and over time they become impervious. So that's some of the challenges with at least enforcing that, down the road. So.
All right. Are there any other motions anyone would like to make tonight to ask the staff to draft any further amendments for our consideration? Yes, please.
Or be it resolved that the staff look into consideration of having flexibility or having a condition where one driveway requirement for single-family duplex, triplex, or fourplex residential uses is not the requirement, but there's the ability to potentially put 2 drives on there if there's a duplex or a triplex. I'm not saying that that's the, so you have the I'm trying to justify it out a little bit here for you, Scott, but the default is 1, but there is the ability upon decision, say by the Plan Commission or the staff, depending on the size of the lot, to have 2 drive cuts. Does that make sense?
Are you asking me a question?
I'm asking you, does it make sense?
The question at this point is simply, do you have enough information to know what this amendment would?
I think you have enough information. I think, there's access management standards that we look at on multiple drives on properties. You start playing into impervious surface, which was in another amendment that was being proposed. So, these things start compounding on each other. I don't want to get into the merits tonight. So I think,
not our,
but we can take a look at it.
Thanks.
Right. And I should make clear to everyone, I think it's already clear to the commissioners, but when the staff comes back with the amendments that we've asked them to draft, staff is going to do a brief report on each of these, and staff might very well tell us that the amendment's a bad idea and we shouldn't adopt it. That's certainly within their purview to recommend against adoption of any of these amendments. We're just asking them to put the language together so we can consider them. All right? So staff understands what the motion is, so that's a valid motion. Do we have a second for this motion to open up the possibility of more than 1 drive? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion before we vote on asking the staff to draft it?
Just to clarify, so this is to make it possible possible to add more driveways. The
To
default
add, to
in
add
the
another
current code would be
driveway
just
in
one.
a plex type of situation.
Okay.
Perhaps from the position of alleviating street parking demand. Okay.
And also increasing possible ownership.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a motion and a second, and the staff knows what's being requested, whether they like it or not. It's a separate question. Do we have any other comments? All right, we'll have a roll call.
Copper.
Yes.
Whistler. Yes. St. John.
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes.
Kate.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Kappas.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
All right. Are there any other motions that anyone would like to make tonight? Going once, going twice. You got one more? No? Okay,
Well, actually, yes.
go for it.
Be it resolved that the staff look into trees I know this is kind of bundling in, but it's really more specific to trees that are not just discouraged, but prohibited from being planted in the city based upon their characteristics and well-being and safety.
All right, that's a pretty clear motion to amend the ordinance to classify some trees as prohibited. We have a second. Any discussion about whether to ask the staff to draft this one?
List of prohibited trees. We have the invasive species, and then we have the not desirables. I mean, that's already done, correct?
Right, so some of the non-desirables, I believe, should be reconsidered.
You want to
So I'm
move
asking
some
for-
of the
it's not that we don't-
non-desirables into the...
We do have, yes, so I can clarify
Yeah.
that some of our non-desirable trees be reconsidered for the prohibited,
The invasive.
the invasive.
Yeah, the way I read that chapter, it says prohibited species on top, and then it just categorizes that, but to me, they are all prohibitive, correct?
Not the way that it's written, from my understanding.
Can you explain? Yeah, can you clarify that? Yes.
I think we did hear something from the Environmental Commission at our meeting on Monday to this effect.
Yes.
That-
Yes.
Yeah.
Page
That's all.
168.
I had notes from that, that's why I made the motion.
Yeah, so it does currently say in the current code, species considered unacceptable and should not be planted because of invasive characteristics, weak wood, or abundant litter, and that's invasive and trees with poor characteristics. Was that the question?
So
You mean
that's.
current code or current draft of?
Oh,
the
I'm
new-
sorry, I said current, I was looking in the current code, but I don't think it changed. But do you think it changed, Nick?
Yes,
Okay, we'll check that and just make sure.
thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I think for protocol purposes, we do need, do we have a second on this? Okay, we have a second, and let's go ahead and take a vote to ask the staff to clean up this provision.
Whistler. Yes. Burrell.
Yes.
Copper.
Yes.
St. John. Kate.
Yes. Sorry.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Kappas.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
All right, any other motions? Tonight is not your last chance, but I don't want to cut anybody off. Okay.
I'll do one more. Let's see if we can get through this one more. Sorry, I don't mean to keep it a secret, but I'm trying to be responsive to all the different notes that came in, and I think this one's worth considering. So the other, one of the responders, or one of the commenters from last week's from the first slew of comments that we received, asked about clarifications around electrical vehicle charging. And I think this is an interesting question this is about, let me get the page, 165. It's page 165, number 8, in the provision for electrical vehicle charging in parking areas. And the way the piece is currently worded, it's that electric vehicle parking spaces shall not count toward the maximum allowed number of parking spaces. And the person making this request or making a comment about this indicated that that in this way, the EV parking spaces, he's saying she is saying should not count toward the maximum number allowed. The future of passenger vehicles is electric vehicles, so should building these spaces as additional parking seems superfluous, that rather they should be part of the maximum allowed parking. So I wonder if there's an easy way to kind of make that provision in this. And we ought to at least bring it forward and have a discussion about whether that amendment could be changed to make it actually as part of the maximum allowed parking versus in addition to.
So
Does that make sense?
So as the draft UDO currently provides, the electric parking spaces are on top of the maximum of
Yeah.
non-electric parking spaces.
Yes.
I just want to make sure.
As the future of electric
Yeah,
vehicles.
sure.
I just want to honor what people submitted that I think is a reasonable thing to think about.
All right, so I think it's pretty clear what's being requested as an amendment. Do we have a second on this one?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second for staff to draft the amendment. It seems like a pretty clear request. Any questions or comments? Yes, Brad?
You suggesting that electric vehicles count the same as any other parking space?
Yeah, essentially.
I think the point was to create some incentive for providing electric vehicles. So I get your point, right? We don't necessarily want it to get to a place where all vehicles are electric and therefore you have an unlimited number of spaces, right? So maybe, I think what I would suggest is something that counts them, but maybe not the same as a space that has no charging. Maybe you get an additional so many spaces if they have charging, but not just no cap whatsoever for those that have charging stations.
Yeah, I don't know if I can figure out what the right calculation would be. Like you get 2 electric for, and you get
But I guess
1
yeah,
free or something, I don't know, but.
Yeah, I'd like to see something more like that, but I don't know, if your intent is to count them exactly the same, then we can proceed with this motion, maybe I'll make another one.
Yeah, I think that was the submitter's intent, was that these should not be additional, but rather as part of the maximum allowed parking.
Again, I think the request is clear. We can debate the merits of it when we have the amendment drafted. Any other questions, comments? All right, let's have a vote.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Copper,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes.
All right, so the staff will bring us back an amendment. I might suggest to staff on this one, since we've heard already a kind of alternate version, that maybe this is one where you could bring us 2 options, since it's pretty straightforward either way. Okay? Any other amendments that people would like to request tonight for the staff to draft for us? Going once, going twice. All right, then I'm going to call this part of the meeting to a close. We have one last thing to do, and that would be to go back to the public. At this point, what I would ask is any member of the public who would like to tell us that we should be asking for something else to be amended that we haven't already put on the list? So something new that we haven't mentioned tonight that you think we should be asking the staff to draft as an amendment. If you have anything along those lines, this is the time for public comment of that sort. So again, if you want us to draft an amendment about the plexes, we've already done that. We're not going to pick that subject up again until we get through that amendment. But anything new that we haven't done tonight, please step up and give us your 2 cents or more. And also, I need names and the usual.
Sure. I'm Eoban Binder, and I'll just mention one thing right now, which is about lot sizes. So my understanding is the current UDO draft specifies a minimum 5,500 square feet for R3, which is residential small lot, equivalent to the current residential core, which I find a little strange, and here's why. If you look at the minimum lot size for example, residential multifamily, it's actually smaller than residential small lot. It's 5,000 compared to 5,500 for R3. I'm not really sure what the intent was there to actually have a larger minimum lot size for R3, but it seems to me that if you're talking about a multifamily building versus a single-family house, you could probably decrease the minimum lot size for single-family zoning. Addressing R4, which is like a slightly more dense single-family zoning, R4, that minimum lot size is 4,200 square feet currently in the draft. But you don't have to look hard to find places where, in fact, the lots are smaller still than that. A good example is, I don't know if it really has a name anymore, but the Beeline station at Artisan Row. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, I hope. They're colorful houses along the Beeline. It's where Hopscotch is, in a sort of mock train station building. There's also some row houses there in a brick building. I've talked to a lot of people who love that development. They say, wow, this is what we need more of in Bloomington, not giant student housing complexes, but, cute houses that blend in with the neighborhood, that are a reasonable size and everything. Well, those houses are on lots that are 3,900 square feet, so smaller still than R4. So think about that. If the intent of the new UDO is to reduce the need for planned unit developments, then I really think you need to look carefully at decreasing the minimum lot sizes across the board. Because if to build a development akin to the Artisan Row development with the colorful houses on the Beeline, you would still need to apply as a developer for a PUD in order to build something like that. And remember, that if you think about it, those houses in a lot of ways are still very suburban in character. They all have front yards with white picket fences and front porches and balconies, and almost all of them have 2-car garages in the back with big driveways to park another couple of cars, and I think almost all of them have backyards. So, by all accounts, they're exactly the type of development that a lot of people in Bloomington are saying we should have plenty of, and yet that exact development would still not be allowed under the new UDO, under R4, the densest of the 4 residential zoning types. So I would really encourage the Plan Commission to suggest an amendment to staff that looks at really significantly reducing, particularly R3 and R4. I live in Prospect Hill, which is zoned, what would be zoned R3 under the new zoning, and there are tons of houses on lots that are way smaller than 5,500 square feet. They're smaller than the 4,200 square feet R4, which is probably not what Prospect Hill will get zoned as, but I think you understand the point I'm making. There's so many existing houses out there that are a reasonable size, they have yards, and they're on very small lots. People are always asking, how can we make, how can we encourage, affordable single-family owner-occupied housing? Right, that's like the holy grail, right? Make it affordable and, blending in with our current neighborhoods. Well, that's one way to help do it, is to significantly decrease the minimum lot size. I mean, I would even argue there shouldn't really be a minimum at all, right? Like, leave it up to people building the houses to decide, okay, is this going to work if I'm a developer and I'm building a house, will I be able to sell it at a current size? So please consider an amendment to decrease the minimum lot sizes.
Thank you, and extremely well timed.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Cox Ash. I would love to see an amendment in there of protecting our affordable housing stock. These are our diamonds of our community. These are where people, first-time homeowners, start. When they first buy a house, these are students who have graduated or moved on to jobs and they need their first house. These are young families when they're first starting out. These are elders who are downsizing and needing a smaller footprint. We need to protect the affordable housing, and I wish you would do something about that. A lot of the affordable housing is in the current core neighborhoods, but it's in other areas too. And really, the ADUs could be part of that too, if you have residents living in there and helping out the house, the main house, the owner in the main house, such as an elder needing assistance. And I think this was one of the main reasons for the ADUs to start out with. But if you could draft something, and I'm not sure how verbally it can be done, but recently in my neighborhood, there was a house 1 block away from us, and the asking price was, I think, $169,900, and what it was officially accepted was like, I think, $175,000 or $176,000, so it was above the asking price. And what happened? Who was the person who bought it, or the entity? It was an investor. It's going to be a rental house. It had been an owner-occupied. So owner-occupied people are being bought out or outpriced on these core neighborhood houses. So we should be protecting our affordable housing stock. And affordable housing does not necessarily mean single-family houses. It also can be parts in complexes if it's affordable, but we need to protect it. So it would be nice to see affordable housing, an amendment protecting that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate Rosenberger. I was actually coming to talk about minimum lot sizes as well, so Mr. Binder covered that, I think, pretty well, but just a few more points on that. I also live in R3, and my lot is 7,200 square feet. Right down the street from me are homes that are subdivided on the next block. So we have lots there that then would be, if anything, their lots are narrower than mine, but that would be 3,600, right, square feet. And I think those fit really well, and they give people opportunity to move into the neighborhood who might not be able to afford a big lot with a big yard. I also think being able to subdivide sort of like the average lot size in our neighborhood makes a lot of sense, because it helps retirees stay there and age in place. I mean, we hear a lot of folks, even millennials really, saying like, I don't want a yard anymore, or I don't want a yard at all, and I want a small house because I want to be out socializing. And so this really gives more people an opportunity to live in a neighborhood where maybe they don't want a big house or a big yard. Also, it's kind of hard to talk about without a picture, but if we, especially on corner lots, allow for subdividing, so we would have then a house that faces the other street, right? And that helps with privacy for other homeowners along that block. Because right now, the way it is, our lots are so deep, and as you walk down that sidewalk, you can look into everyone's backyard. But instead, if you have a house sitting at the back of that lot, you look at that house instead of for people's backyard. So people tend to like that, and it feels quaint and private by putting houses on those corner lots. And another point about subdividing is, I think this is how it works, but the UDO draft says you can't subdivide and then build a duplex or a plex. So the only thing you would be allowed to put on these lots, I think that's right, would be single-family homes. So it is a really great way to add smaller homes, hopefully more affordable prices, and home ownership, because I'm all about home ownership. And then on Monday, I talked a little bit about occupancy rates for plexes, and I really do think that should be the same as single-family homes, and I hope that you all will take that into consideration between now and next Thursday. I just think it's really excluding a lot of people that we're trying to help by saying 2 adults and 2 dependents is a max occupancy for a plex side. I just think families are so wildly different nowadays, and it doesn't seem like a Bloomington thing to do to have such a conservative definition of family. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Fiedler, and I am a resident of Elm Heights, and I'm speaking merely as a resident tonight. On Monday, I spoke as the president of the Elm Heights Neighborhood Association, however. As you know, there are single-family zones next to or near campus, and I think we have some unique concerns that not all of the single-family zones within the city itself share. The aim of the updating the UDO is to increase affordable housing. However, in the downtown neighborhoods, a lot of the housing market, especially the rental market, is driven almost exclusively by students. And the student rental market is fairly inelastic with respect to price. They will pay whatever the market will bear, and currently they're paying above affordable housing prices for rentals now. That's completely understandable. They want to be close to campus. That's where they're spending most of their time. But whenever we increase housing density, we're going to increase investor interest because they can charge students more. And so it's how do we balance the need for more housing stock in Bloomington with the need also to keep the existing neighborhoods, the character of the existing neighborhoods there, which is why the people moved there in the first place. And with respect to allowing plexes, one of the ways to do this would be to have an owner occupancy requirement in the plex, as we do in the ADUs currently, in the currently existing UDO, so that the person renting it has a stake in the neighborhood. They have to live there too, and reap what they sow when they rent to somebody, so that they won't rent out a party house and just completely upset the neighbors. That will keep the existing community, which is what drew the rest of the neighborhood there, keep that intact in those single-family zones near campus. Now, I want to be clear, this is purely for the single-family zones that I'm speaking of, not necessarily, there are much denser developments near campus, and those I'm not speaking about in this. But I think an owner occupancy requirement in plexes in the single-family zone will go a long way to alleviating many of the concerns that the residents have with allowing those uses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Daniel Bingham. Last time I came, I spoke about density and why it is valuable in and of itself because of sustainability and because of equity. I want to speak today to the affordability aspect with a suggestion for potential addition. Granted, I have not had the chance to read through all the UDO, so this might already be included in it, but if it's not, I think it's really important. if you do research into affordability and how it's actually created, and what cities have actually had success in knocking down housing prices, density and upzoning is a necessary component of it, but it is not the be-all and end-all. The cities that have successfully knocked back their housing prices have taken an everything and the kitchen sink approach. They have aggressively upzoned and removed single-family zoning, allowing density to come in and allowing an aggressive building spree to happen. They have also aggressively protected tenants' rights so that people who are renting have more security and can push back against landlords. They have also aggressively pursued nonprofit housing providers like community land trusts and like cooperatives. They have also very active activist scenes that protect renters from landlords, predatory landlords, and back them up. It takes all of that. Cities like Denver, cities like Seattle, they've been doing this for years, and they have finally started to see home prices drop and housing prices drop. But it took everything. We cannot hold our neighborhood static and think that that will somehow preserve affordability. It won't. No city has done that. And the researchers who are studying affordability actually point to the onset of single-family zoning, which was created with the express intent of pricing people of color out of neighborhoods. They point to that, they point to the spread of it into our big cities, and they point to the power of neighborhood associations to protect it and prevent it from being upzoned and densified. That is the source of the housing crises in our big cities. We cannot beat back housing prices without upzoning, without allowing our neighborhoods to densify. But it cannot stop there. We then have to go establish, we don't have a community land trust, we need to establish one. We have a housing cooperative, we should have more than one, and we need to foster them and help them grow. We need better renter protections. You know, we hear a lot about students and how this is going to create rentals. I think Bloomington's market is right now 60 to 67% rental. When you think about it, half the population in the United States has less than $1,000 in savings, meaning they cannot possibly buy a home. In Bloomington, you can assume that is roughly Bloomington's distribution. It probably has some variability in there, but then in Bloomington, half of our population in addition to that is students who are short-term residents who need to rent, which means our rental proportion of the market should probably be closer to 70 or 75%. Half of the 40,000 who are long-term residents can't afford to buy, and half of our total population are students. That's 75%. Obviously, there's some give room in there, but honestly, we probably should have more rental than we do. The suggestion I have is to create a specific zoning for cooperatives. I don't know if it exists in the UDO because I haven't had the chance to read all 400 pages of it. Cooperatives being a type of housing where individuals, members of the cooperative, rent a single bedroom, share living spaces, share kitchens, share living rooms. They come in both nonprofit and for-profit flavors. If we can find a way to favor the nonprofit, those are the ones that provide affordable housing. It is a challenging way to live. I served as president of the board of Bloomington Cooperative Living for 3 years, and I was on the board for 4. It's definitely hard, but there are lots of people who are interested in trying it, and you can provide really affordable housing that way. We did. Housing prices at Bloomington Cooperative Living range from $400 to $630 for a bedroom in downtown, inclusive of food and utilities, in really easy walking range to campus and downtown, which is pretty cheap, and we hold it there. And the members, you know, in the case of BCL, the members democratically run the organization, so they get to choose whether or not to raise their own rents. Do we need to improve the building? Okay, let's raise rent. No, let's not. We've had, every time BCL has gone to get a new building, we've had to get a special variance for it. If we had a set zoning, it would make it a lot easier for BCL to expand and for other cooperatives to establish. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak to us tonight about things that we haven't already dealt with earlier?
Hello, my name is Vox. I may have missed some of the beginning, so I hope I don't repeat, but I would like to...
I'll jump in if you do.
Thank you. I would like to second my approval that we should work on creating some type of zoning that intentionally addresses cooperatives and intentional communities, as well as we look at reclaiming some of the housing that's currently occupied by students now. If you look at a lot of the student housing towards the west side, I've lived there for the last few years, and when I moved in, it was mostly grad students mixed with some families. Over the last year alone, there was a 30% rise in the average rental rate. So I saw a lot of families be literally priced out of the neighborhood and it just become all students because you can charge students that rate, they're willing to pay. I would love to see ordinance that specifically looks at, I know you guys are going to look at creating a student housing zone. I would like to see ordinance in place that would reclaim some of that space on the west side that's suitable for family housing, but it's just the profit motive that's driven families out of there. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to ask us to take up any other topics we haven't already done? Richard.
Richard Martin. A couple of other things that have occurred to me over the course of this.
You better pull the mic a little closer, Richard.
I'll talk to the mic. This notion of ownership and requirements on ownership for certain kinds of housing. If you look at there is the presumption that ownership is individuals or couples or small family units. You have in the city ownership by corporations of single-family housing. You have ownership by trusts of single-family housing, and determining who the owner-occupier is under those conditions, I don't think has been addressed in the text of the ordinance. It would be unusual if it is, but those are situations which are becoming more prevalent now. So there is that one. Earlier tonight, you looked at making a change that had to do with a point in time when certain zones existed and the kinds of things that applied after that point in time. Over the course of the life of this ordinance that you're doing now, the city will expand. It will take in new properties. The normal mechanism for doing that is to retain the zoning ordinance of the newly acquired properties into the city until such time as you then rezone them into zones that are those of the city. Those transition rules would say, the way you've got it written now, that nothing else being done, all of them would be subject to the provisions that you had changed the zoning after the date of your adoption, after your effective date. That's probably not a good thing to do because they are already zoned single-family residential, et cetera. You should look at the ordinance to see where you're going to create transition rule problems as the city grows. And you do rezonings into the current city zone from whatever the county zone is that they now exist in. You're going to have to do that. Normally, that's done as part of the legislation which changes that can't be done as part of the legislation which changes the city boundaries, because you're at that point have to accept the zoning that's there. You change that zoning subsequent to that. So that's an issue that you're going to have to probably deal with. I had one more that I thought you ought to deal with. So the ownership, the transition rules. I have more opportunities later. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that we haven't heard from yet tonight who would like to speak to us about subjects you'd like us to see taking up in amending the document? All right. Seeing none, we are back to the commission. I'm going to get us back on our preferred schedule, which is that we are back to the commission. If anybody wants to take one more crack at adding anything to the list of amendments for staff to draft for us that maybe came out of the public comments. This is kind of what we were going to do on Monday, but we kind of ran out of time. Is there anybody who'd like to add anything based on what we've just heard, or because of what you've thought about in the interim? Or are we done for tonight? Okay, I'm seeing nobody on my right. Oh, Brad, are you thinking about it?
There are several things that I think we're going to want to bring forward. I think it might be premature to try to do it so quickly, but I'm sure
that's fine.
Some of the comments are certainly going to, I think, spark some additional
And
suggestions.
this is also
here.
a discussion time. I'm going to ask staff a question because I could not quickly find the answer. Does the code draft UDO as it stands now have a defined use for co-op type housing or We've been through this numerous times in the past, and it seems like whether we create a separate zone and say, this is the only place where it can go, it seems like we ought to define it as a use and then include it in whatever zones we think it's appropriate as, whether that's a conditional use, whether that's a permitted use. I couldn't find the definition of co-housing, co-op housing in our list of defined terms. And if so, that maybe I just missed it, but if that's right, then that does seem like something we ought to take up by amendment. Yes.
Along with that, too, there are, we've been talking about duplexes, triplexes, quads, but there are other kinds of housing forms. There are row houses, there are brownstones that are more multi-use, but not the multi-story, huge residential.
Well, some of those, I think, will be permitted under the category of multifamily. In multifamily housing. But co-op has its own unique characteristics, and we have struggled in the past to fit it into our existing code language. So Scott, I think at the moment, I'm not going to request an amendment. I'm going to ask you to look into this one and see if we need to add something to address the where and under what circumstances we would want to permit co-op or co-housing options.
About that and talk with our consultants on that. And
exactly.
their
So I'm not making a resolution tonight. I think but I do think that's something we ought to take up.
In their experience in other communities that might have that sort of tool.
Yep. Okay. Yes.
Just to follow on, there is a definition in the draft of something called residential rooming house, and perhaps we could just expand that definition to make sure it is covering what we might think of as a co-op. I think in form and in terms of intensity of use, they're probably pretty similar. Certainly, maybe very different in terms of, the
it would have to be
business
tweaked,
structure.
It would have to be tweaked quite a bit to fit some of the things we've seen that were good, sound proposals for co-op housing. The kind of thing I'm talking about, where it's multiple buildings, there's shared buildings, there's, so it's not quite what you think of as a rooming house, but maybe there's a way to work and
Don't we already have language that talks about pocket neighborhoods, which is kind of similar, and tiny home opportunities? Yes, no?
Yes, but again, neither of them fit the, go ahead.
I think you're right to ask us to look into it. I'm wary because in many states, and I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana is one of them, zoning by the form of ownership that is going on in the building is not permitted. You need to define a type. A tiny house is a house that sits by itself. You can have a rooming house. You can have a room in which, a place in which kitchens and bathrooms are shared, but you have to define the type of house, and that's the hard, we can do that. I think your code should include a wide variety. It already includes a wider variety. It could be even wider, but to try to define it in terms of a form of ownership is illegal in a lot of states and almost impossible to enforce. And so I would suggest we look at it in terms of missing forms of housing rather than forms of ownership.
And that's precisely why we have you guys here, is to help us with that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, anything else for the good of the order, as they say, before we close for tonight? Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I think on the lot size issue, I guess I would ask the staff, or resolve to ask the staff to look at amending the minimum lot sizes to address some of the issues that were brought forward by the public.
I think that's an issue we are going to want to take up at some point. I'm not sure we're ready yet to ask for specific amendment language on it, because we'd have to tell them like what we think the new.
Yeah, if it's premature, we can
Yeah,
wait
yeah,
until
but
later. But I just want,
I didn't mean to
would like
suggest
phrase-
that. That was the other, I put a bunch of stars next to these comments, and
Yeah.
that's one of them,
Yeah.
for sure.
So, okay, it can.
I think one of the things to keep in mind with our landscaping, buffering, setbacks, impervious surface, these are all things that we've been balancing, and lot size and building width. They start conflicting with one another on how we establish those. So it's certainly something we can look at, but I just want Planning Commission to be mindful of how some of these things compete with one another on. You know, if you decrease your impervious surface, then you might have to increase your lot size, as an example. And then again, there's transition rules and setbacks, and all that stuff starts becoming interrelated.
So Scott, just a question. So the point was well taken that we have a perfectly good, viable example of really, really small lot development near the Beeline there. Would that have to be done under this, since this code really discourages PUDs, would that have to be done as a pocket neighborhood, or how would one accomplish something like that under this kind of code? How would we get there?
Yeah, so yes, pocket neighborhood, you could get similar to that, not that particular design, because the pocket neighborhood has requirements for shared space and parking.
Which wouldn't be true of these.
It would have to be done through plan unit development.
So PUD would be our only option?
For that specific one that he mentioned, yes.
For that specific one. Okay. Well, I think that's precisely the kind of thing that we should, at some point, take up. Do we want to have a code that basically is going to make it harder, since we're discouraging PUDs in this code, to make it harder to develop something like that, which seems to have been such a successful project?
Or acknowledging what Scott says, which is there's sort of a cascade of other things that are implicated by changing the lot size. Nevertheless, given the PUD issue, figuring out, are there ways to work on those other requirements that would make sense? I don't know, but just, it does sound like something we'd want to take up.
Yep.
Or so.
Yep. We still got work to do.
Just for people who are here, to make it abundantly clear that we heard comments tonight, and just because we're stopping with our proposed amendments does not mean we won't be bringing more next time, and it just keeps going.
Yeah.
Right, so we just heard it, but we're not, the fact that we don't bring it up tonight doesn't mean we won't bring it up at the next meeting. So just so that's clear to the public, too.
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
Anything else? Don't want to cut anybody off? Okay, then before I call the meeting to a close, I'll reiterate that our next meeting is 1 week from tonight, Thursday, September 5th at 5:30 in council chambers. On that night, we will begin with amendments that we have requested the staff to bring to us. And we will begin, if the omnibus amendment, the corrections are done, we'll do that one. But then we're going to move directly into the series of amendments that I began this meeting requesting, dealing with the plexes, dealing with the ADUs, if we have the time to get to that one. I'm not sure we will. The plexes may take all night. But that's where we will start on Thursday, September 5th. All the other amendments we've requested tonight will kick over to our subsequent meeting, which will be on Tuesday, September 10th at 5:30. And we're going to need to schedule more meetings after that, because we won't be ready to put this thing to bed at that point. Okay? Clear enough? That's a fair question, Scott. For the amendments that are going to be discussed on September 5th, and that's a limited set. We know what they are. It's that first 5 that we talked about tonight. Can we ask that those, when you're ready, when you think you've got those drafted, can we get those on the website in a manner that would allow people to see the the text of them. They're pretty straightforward, those 5.
Yeah, I think we could get something up. I mean, what I did last Monday night, I just posted the resolution for people to comment on and then left a general comment form. If we had actual material, I could post that. We have a little bit more time. You have a week. It is a holiday
So maybe
week.
by early next week, couple
It
days
is,
before
it is a
the
holiday
meeting.
weekend, I want to point out. We'll do our best to get it. If worst case, I could at least get the resolutions up there for people to provide feedback on those and get that going. But
Right.
we'll
It would
do our
probably
best.
help us, too, to be able to see the text of the amendments, at least the day before.
I think, I mean, obviously, we want to get them to the Plan Commission and the public as soon as possible so you can see them, but our intent is to allow for people to participate if they're not able to attend the meeting.
And is it a fair statement that the place to go is the constantly evolving UDO
Yes.
adoption website, right?
Yeah, and we've had some people call in looking for the comment form, and the way I'm updating the page is I put the most recent thing at the top of the page. The page is very long, you have to scroll down it. So when you first load up the page, you might not see where the comment form is, but it's there. Just spend a little bit of time looking for it, and I'll try to do my best to get more opportunity for people to provide feedback, again, if they're not able to attend next week.
Thank you for all your efforts to keep on top of this, Scott. I know it's a great burden, and I can see the bags under your eyes are getting darker and
I've got a
deeper.
good team to work with, so they're keeping me supported, so.
All right.
Thank you.
The acknowledgement of Scott's work and the whole planning department is definitely worth doing, but I also want to acknowledge all the public comment. It's been terrific to see this kind of expression of concern and support and interest in this topic. So thanks to everybody who has submitted really substantive comments online using the feedback forms that Scott just referenced, and then for those of you who showed up here. So thank you for all that.
All right, if there's no further business, then we will see you all in a week with some pretty important amendments to consider, and we are adjourned. Thank you.